She was beautiful. She was great, great person. But to have a bill of such importance named after her is a great tribute.
That was President Donald Trump talking about the very first piece of legislation that he will sign later today in one of his first official acts as the 47th President of the United States. Today is Wednesday, January 29th, and this is Political Update here on Atlanta News First and atlantanewsfirst.com. I'm Tim Darnell, and before we get started, we are so excited to have one of the nation's most respected and recognizable anchors and journalists on television. We're talking, of course, about our own Rick Fulbaum. Rick, when you and I were talking about whether or not we can make this happen, I got really excited because we're so thrilled to be able to offer your expertise and your analysis and your insight into Georgia, which is arguably the nation's most dynamic political state. So we're very happy to have you here on Political Update.
Thanks, Tim. A very nice and generous introduction. I really appreciate that. And I'm excited to be here, too, because I think that you're right, that we are at a very important moment here in the history of the state of Georgia. We have watched some transformations over the last couple of election cycles that I think have really put our state on the map in terms of the importance that we hold nationally when it comes to national politics. And so we're going to delve into some of the issues that our state lawmakers are dealing with, that our federal lawmakers are dealing with, and of course our new president as well. We'll talk about how it impacts people here in Georgia and around the country, and I'm excited to do that with you.
And we're excited to have you here. We're talking about some very serious issues, and first and foremost, the issue of immigration and immigration reform. As I mentioned at the top of the stream, President Trump will sign into law the Laken Riley Act later today, Wednesday, January 29th. This is a bill that was introduced last year in both houses of Congress, the House and the Senate. Did not pass, but shortly after Donald Trump's inauguration last week, the U.S. House and later the U.S. Senate did vote in a series of bipartisan votes to advance the Laken Riley Act to President Trump's desk. This is a bill that is designed, its supporters say, to strengthen local and federal law enforcement in terms of immigration reform. It's named, obviously, after the tragic case of the former University of Georgia nursing student Laken Riley, whose body was found on the campus of UGA almost a year ago. Rick, tell us how this horrible, horrible crime really became the centerpiece of the national discussion on immigration reform throughout the 2024 presidential election.
Well, I think there was already talk about the need for immigration reform. It's actually a topic that administrations, dating back decades have talked about the need to reform immigration. Going back, I remember even Ronald Reagan's administration trying to tackle that issue. And so this has really been something that has been a part of the national debate for some time. But then the terrible case involving Laken Riley on the campus of UGA took place, you're right, almost exactly a year ago. It was February 2024. And once we learned that the suspect and then eventually the person convicted of that heinous crime was an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela, somebody who had entered the country illegally, who was allowed to stay while the immigration process played out, only to then commit this crime during that period. It really did galvanize support behind some of the more stringent policies that then candidate Trump was talking about as he ran for his second term. And so, it really was, as you said, a rallying cry for Republicans, for conservatives who wanted to use this as a campaign issue, who saw this as an opportunity to raise awareness and to spark conversation about the need to go after people who have entered into our country illegally. And the argument is pretty simple, that if he had only been stopped at the border or had not been allowed to enter the country, that he would not have been able to commit this terrible crime. And so that is the argument. I should note that data has shown that people who are immigrants, who are here in this country, having moved here from someplace else, are no more or less likely to commit crimes. But again, it did feed into that narrative that these are lawbreakers to begin with. These are people who have come here without going through the proper channels, and then not only were they here, but then they committed crimes while they were here illegally. And so this gave then candidate Trump a real opportunity to talk about some of the policies that he wanted to put in place. It gave Republicans an opportunity to sort of frame the debate in a way that was beneficial to them. It put Democrats on the defensive, a lot of whom were against these types of more strict policies when it comes to deporting people who were here in the country illegally. You hear about the so-called path to citizenship. You hear about the so-called dreamers. And it's Democrats who typically are the ones that want to try to find a compromise solution that would allow some of these people, some of whom were brought here to this country by their parents, through no motivation or fault of their own, to allow these people to stay here. And a lot of these people have gone on and served in the military, served honorably, and they make contributions to our economy. And so there is a debate to be had, but then once the Laken Riley murder took place and we learned who had committed it, it really did sort of reframe this issue and make it a very important one for the 2024 election, one that I think Donald Trump was able to use to his benefit politically, and of course we saw his victory in November.
One of the most downloaded podcasts that we make available on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com is an interview I did a couple of weeks ago with Emily Smith, who is an adjunct professor of law at Emory University. And her argument was that this law, which will become a law later today when Donald Trump signs it, doesn't really address the overall issue of efficient immigrant detention. Her argument was that it's simply going to create a lot of confusion at the local and federal law enforcement level and really cause even more overcrowding in our nation's jails. Tell me, there's a lot of concern about what the effects of this law actually are going to turn out to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are valid questions to be asked and things that will need to be sorted out. And we haven't exactly heard all of the details and all of the sort of the thought process behind what happens to the legal system with all of these cases. It's a legal system that is already stretched, and now we're going to add all of these new immigration cases to it. How is all of that going to play out just from a practical standpoint? So I think that people who have criticized this law and who point to those types of questions, are raising legitimate concerns. I should also note, though, that and you said as well in the beginning, that this is the Laken Riley Act that is soon to become law, got bipartisan support, including from both of our U.S. senators here in Georgia, both of whom are Democrat, of course, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. You always have to consider politics when talking about the votes of politicians. They're certainly calculating those types of things in their minds when they go ahead and place their votes. We know that Jon Ossoff is up for re-election in 2 years. He'll run for a second term during the midterm elections in 2026. And then Raphael Warnock is up for a second full term 2 years after that. And so, we see both of these lawmakers trying to position themselves here in the state of Georgia for second terms. And, and even though there are questions like the ones that have been raised by the professor whom you spoke with, there are enough Democrats who are okay with this and in support of this to help move it through the judicial process, the legislative process rather, and who are going to help this become law, the law of the land in the coming hours. And so we'll see how all of this plays out. A lot of times this is sort of a wait and see. It would be nice if all of these questions were answered ahead of time, but unfortunately, as we know, a lot of times these questions come up and they have to be answered along the way, and I think that that's what's going to happen with this as well.
And the issue of immigration, taking our discussion a little bit further, the issue of immigration is a national topic and really came to the forefront late last week and over the weekend, continuing today as federal immigration authorities continue to carry out a series of raids throughout some of the nation's most major metropolitan areas, including Atlanta. Our own Sarah Hammond filed this report very recently.
Since U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents have arrested more than 3,500 undocumented immigrants in the last week across the country, some Georgia lawmakers say they are disappointed.
It's just so sad to see families being ripped apart by a cruel administration.
Democratic State Senator Kim Jackson says she's gotten dozens of calls from her constituents in Gwinnett and DeKalb counties, worried they will be targeted.
And I've had people ask me, do I need to carry my papers with me? Is it safe for my children to go to school? They're very, very worried.
And we've had people ask us who ICE agents are looking for right now. Undocumented folks who have been here most of their lives with no criminal record, or those who have a criminal history, or all of the above. Well, Republican lawmakers here in Georgia, like Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, are reiterating who ICE agents are primarily going after right now.
They were going to go after, the ones who had already committed crimes, or the ones who had, already they're on their list of being very dangerous individuals, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Republican House Speaker John Burns says he is supportive of President Donald Trump's crackdown, but encourages people who want to come here to work to go through the proper channels.
President Trump's doing what he was elected to do, and that's a crackdown on criminal, illegal aliens here. And I want to make this perfectly clear that we're not against anyone coming here legally.
That was Sarah Hammond reporting on a recent series of deportation operations carried out by federal immigration authorities here in Metro Atlanta. Rick, for those of us who covered Donald Trump's first election in 2016 and him taking office the following year, we remember that there were a lot of immigration actions, such as the ones that we're witnessing right now. Tell us what's different about 2016, 2017, 2018 compared to 2024, 2025, and moving beyond. There was seemingly a lot of uncertainty years ago when Donald Trump first took office. It seems like it's a little bit different now.
Well, I think one of the biggest differences, we don't hear any talk about building a wall. That was really one of the big campaign lines on Mr. Trump's stump speech when he was running for office in 2016. You heard his supporters chanting, build that wall, because of his promise that he was going to build it, that he was going to get Mexico to pay for it, this wall on the southern border. We know, of course, that only a very small portion of that wall was ever built, and that Mexico did not end up paying for any of it. But that is no longer a part of the conversation. We don't hear the White House talking about efforts to go back in and finish construction of the so-called wall along the southern border. Now the focus of the debate this time around really seems to be getting rid of, deporting people who are already here. people who have already come to this country and have come here illegally, and getting those people sent back to the countries that they came from. And so that is a big difference, which is not to say that that the Trump administration is ignoring the southern border and not going to be trying to put policies in place to prevent people from crossing over. But at least in these early stages of Trump 2.0, the focus has been more on the deportation of these undocumented immigrants, these people who are here illegally, these lawbreakers, to use the word of the president's new press secretary yesterday. She said this is a cultural shift in our country to think of these people as lawbreakers, but in fact that's what they are. And so that's what we're going to, I anticipate that's what we're going to hear more of from this White House, is that these are people, they may be your colleagues, they may be your neighbors, but they broke the law when they came here, and they need to pay the price for that, just like anybody else who breaks a law here in the United States.
You mentioned the White House press secretary's very first media briefing that happened yesterday, Tuesday afternoon. One of the other topics that really dominated that media briefing is an action that actually took effect at 5 p.m. Tuesday afternoon, when the White House announced a suspension, a temporary halting of federal grants to federal programs. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, was quite adamant in her assertions that these federal grants that are being halted do not affect social services, vital social services such as Social Security, veterans benefits, payments, and things of that nature. But Rick, whenever the White House talks about cutting off federal funding using public monies to other programs, that raises the drama level quite substantially across the nation. And there's a lot of drama and a lot of confusion coming out of Washington, and it's being felt all the way to major cities like Metro Atlanta and elsewhere.
Well, you mentioned this pause that the White House announced, and it was only a little while after they announced it that a federal judge actually blocked it. So it has not yet been put in place. The judge giving organizations who are opposed to this a few days to put their legal ducks in a row and mount a legal challenge to it in court that could stop it altogether. For now, it's on pause, judicial pause until Monday. Before some of these cuts and the halting of the funding of these programs is going to take place. And so a little bit of a reprieve there for people who are opposed to this. But what the White House is saying is that, look, President Trump was elected on a promise to shrink the size of the federal government, and that this is all part of his effort to follow through on that and to keep that promise, and that there are a lot of programs that are not in line with the thinking of this new administration, programs that have to do with combating climate change, other social programs that are really sort of against the overall grain of the political views of this new White House, and that those are the programs that they are looking to cut. They're saying we're going to go after these sort of groups and organizations that receive these federal dollars. But of course, where do those federal dollars go? They're funneled through these organizations to individuals who, a lot of cases, who rely on those federal funds for all sorts of things, from their health insurance to paying for small business loans, paying for college and education and all kinds of things. And so the White House is now sort of having, as a result of the judicial block, the temporary block, the White House is probably looking to really be a little bit more specific in terms of what they mean, in terms of which programs are going to not have the funding any longer, and then these groups that are at risk of having their funding cut are putting together, like I said, their legal challenge so that they can bring their case to court and hopefully delay the implementation of this program, this plan from the White House, from having it be put into place at all. So it'll be something interesting to watch between now and Monday to see exactly how all of that plays out. But a battle for sure with this new White House and this new administration that really seems intent to hit the ground running, to flood the zone, to use a sports term here, to try to issue as many executive orders and policies and plans in as short amount of time as possible, to try to get as many of these things pushed through before any major legal challenges can be put in place to block it.
Well, we have a statement from Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens that was issued late yesterday afternoon, and it reads in part, more than 18,000 residents who rely on housing vouchers currently do not know how their rent will be paid next month, and workers across various federally funded programs risk losing their pay. The Dickens administration calls on all White House decision makers to immediately restore this funding for Atlanta and the entire region and the families from all stations of life who will suffer the consequences. It's interesting that Mayor Dickens mentioned housing vouchers in this statement, because that really leads us into our next topic of discussion here on the Wednesday, January 29th, 2025 edition of Political Update, where an Atlanta gentleman who was unhoused, who was homeless, was killed during a City of Atlanta operation that was designed to clear out several homeless encampments. We have this report from our own Brittany Ford.
He was died in a bulldozer. That's his house. If you wanna do the sweep, provide them houses, provide them hotels.
Driving that bulldozer was decades of failed approach.
I'm a bit also really disgusted.
This is the outrage that poured out at Atlanta City Council Thursday regarding the death of Cornelius Taylor. In response, Councilmember Liliana Bakhtiari has put forth two pieces of legislation.
We need to take a pause and reevaluate so nothing like this ever happens again.
One, for the city to invest $1 million toward a case manager program that would provide greater boots on the ground effort to help get the unsheltered off the streets. The other, to put a moratorium on encampment sweeps.
We had somebody pass during a sweep. We don't yet know how the process works. We don't know who orders a sweep.
Taylor was killed as city crews were clearing out this encampment near Auburn Avenue last Thursday, an effort spearheaded by Partners for Home. Bakhtiari says there needs to be a closer look at how the nonprofit is handling services, as there have been loopholes in the past.
They do their point in time count, and that number has to be as required by HUD, and that number has to be published by a certain date. Not only did they miss that date and gave it far after, they also did not show up to present.
Bakhtiari says the mayor's administration has been instrumental with its rapid and affordable housing initiatives, but says Taylor's death shows more needs to be done.
I think one of the most important things, if not the most important thing to remember in all of this, is that Cornelius was and is a human being first.
Rick, this was a tragic case for a gentleman named Cornelius Taylor, who was living in a homeless encampment, was just the victim of a tragic accident. And yet the issue of homeless is one of those issues that continually percolates throughout the metro Atlanta region and in other major metropolitan areas across the country. We have an Atlanta City Councilwoman, Liliana Bakhtiari, who is calling for a moratorium on Atlanta's mandates or laws to clean out homeless encampments. Mayor Dickens has voiced his support as well. This is an issue that's just going to get more and more political attention because Atlanta has some very, very high-profile international events, business events, sporting events coming up, not only this year, but in 2026 and beyond.
That's right, and we of course have the FIFA World Cup coming up next year. A number of the qualifying matches are going to be held at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So yes, this is an issue here in Atlanta. It's an issue in other major metropolitan areas around the country. We have seen this kind of thing happen in cities as they get set to host these big international events. Paris, for example, with the Olympics last summer, had to deal with very similar situations. The homeless problem is not unique, certainly not to Atlanta, certainly not to the United States. It is a problem around the world, sadly. And so how do you deal with it? And these sweeps that are now under so much scrutiny as a result of this this terrible situation with a homeless man perhaps being killed by a city vehicle is something that, again, shines a harsh spotlight on some of the tactics that cities occasionally use in an attempt to clear out these spaces and to help get some of the homeless population into some of the facilities that are available, the shelters that are run by the city. It's very difficult sometimes for city officials to convince a lot of these people to move from the streets into these shelters. People don't feel safe in the shelters. There are all kinds of reasons why people don't want to move into these shelters. But obviously, it's something that it will need to be dealt with. Not just because of the FIFA World Cup, but because we are a humane people who care about our fellow citizens, whether they are homeless or not. And I think that that everybody has compassion for people who have hit hard times, people who suffer from a mental illness, which is another common contributing factor to homelessness. And so coming up with a solution is really a very difficult challenge when it comes to elected officials in places like Atlanta and elsewhere. And we're going to see what happens here with this particular case here in Atlanta. There is some disagreement on exactly how this gentleman was killed, whether it was in fact as a result of being hit by a city vehicle or something else. That has not really been determined. The investigation into his death is still ongoing, and so we don't want to rush to any judgment here or make any conclusions before we know exactly what the facts are. But clearly this is an issue that is percolating here in Atlanta and something that we're going to be hearing a lot more of in the months ahead.
Well, we're covering a number of very important political issues here in Atlanta News First, and this has been the political update for Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. Remember, you can catch and watch Political Update every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. on YouTube and all of our video streaming platforms and channels. Also, all Political Update podcasts and every podcast from Atlanta News First are available for downloading on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcasting and streaming platform. Thanks to Rick Bolbaum. Thanks to all of you for watching and listening to this edition of Political Update on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com.